Hey everybody, welcome back. This is a little different video today, and we're going to talk about the Chevelle a little bit today. Haven't given her enough love here on the channel, and since it seems to be capacitor month here at Sanders Garage, of course it's all been home and compressor related, but figured today I'd show a video on two instances in an automotive situation where capacitors are used and why. And I got a million things to share about this car, things I've done over the years, but this is pretty cool. It's one thing I did with the stereo system in this thing and added a capacitor, and let me show you the reason why I did that. But let's go back to where the amps are and all that. But we basically have two high power amps. One is a 4-channel amp that runs all the speakers inside. And then you have your dedicated subwoofer amp, which we got a subwoofer here, and have a very large capacitor right there. This thing actually is it's a 1 farad. So if you think about it, the other capacitors that I've been changing on the electric motors in the house and the compressor say 300 microfarads. 1 farad equals 1 million microfarads. So you can imagine the stored energy that's in that capacitor as opposed to the smaller ones that are on the other compressor motor and heating system motor. But the reason I put this in here, and it's very interesting, and it solved the problem that I was having, was it takes a lot of power to move heavy subwoofers. These are actually 8-inch subwoofers. I like a real tight, punchy bass. And you listen to some Godsmack Live or AC/DC and you got it turned up. You want that bass to be nice and tight. I never liked that reverberating, huge subwoofer bass. But it takes a lot of power to move high quality subwoofers. So we have our dedicated amp over here for that reason. And before I had installed this capacitor here, what would happen is the voltage system, say it's running about 14 volts, sitting there idling or running down the road or whatever. Anytime the bass would hit, and of course it happens through a song, it hits thousands of times, but anytime there's a real need for the bass in the song, the volt gauge would literally drop down to, like, depending on how high I had the stereo turned up, the voltage would go from 14. Anytime the bass hit, it literally would go down to like 12.5 and then right back up to 14. And you can imagine the chaos that causes in your electrical system of your car. I mean, you could almost tell what song I was playing by the headlight dimming, that kind of thing. But the reason you put this in here is it's basically just stored energy, and it's a 1 farad. So when the bass goes to hit and the amp requires that extra juice, it draws it from the capacitor instead of from your electrical system, which basically is just from the battery, and then your alternator is just trying to keep consistent voltage. But that instant hit, the capacitor gives the amp the extra juice instead of trying to draw from the battery and the alternator, basically. So putting this in here, it not only did it give better sound, because if the amp went to draw from the subwoofer and it didn't have consistent voltage, the sound wouldn't be as good. So putting this in here, now when it's sitting at 14 and you're running down a road and you're cranking that stereo and the bass hits, you literally only get like a 0.2 of a volt drop in the volt gauge, because when that bass hits, it's drawn from here instead of your electrical system. And it basically cured the headlight dimming and the sound quality issues that I was having before I had this capacitor in here. And it made a huge difference. Another thing that serious stereo people do is they add a second battery, which is a good idea. It's basically stored energy, which helps combat that situation. But I didn't, as you can see, I don't even have my battery in the trunk. This is actually truly a dedicated street strip car. And I like to keep things as factory as possible. And I never wanted that switch you have to put through the back of your car to unhook the battery in a racing situation. It's mandated when you have the battery in the trunk. So that's why I didn't do that. And I got a cool thing I'm going to show you with the battery in the front, but that's why I don't have the battery in the trunk. Figured, you know, this thing literally runs, best time I ever ran was 11:30, which is slow by today's standards, but, you know, plenty fast enough for me. But I didn't mind putting a little bit of weight in the car just to have a really nice, high quality sound system. So, like I said, dedicated street strip car, but have the battery up front. But another way to combat that voltage drop issue is people put two batteries in the car. But I'd rather have a 1 pound capacitor doing the job for me, and it does just fine, than adding a 20 pound battery to the car and having kind of dead weight that I didn't need. So that's the reason I went the capacitor route and not the battery route. Okay, so we got the capacitor in there, and you should have a pretty good understanding why I did that. And it solved my issues there. But two other things I did with the electrical system on this car was, since I have this cold air intake and it goes out to my high beam headlight, which that worked out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way that worked. But my battery used to be over here, and basically just took my welder and moved the battery tray over and got the battery up under the fender there. And it more or less looks pretty factory. So that worked out really good. And I got a good 1,000 cold cranking amp battery. Got to have a good high quality battery or your electrical system won't be happy. So we did that. And then we have the feed here. It's fused in the back, but this is feeding the amp or going to the capacitor itself in the back. And we got a nice, I don't know what that is, 200 amp fuse or whatever it is, but that's protecting the line going to the back. Can't never have enough protection with electrical systems. Okay, another really cool thing I did with this car with the electrical system is I got this alternator here, and we have a small crank pulley. Now, given it's a pretty big alternator, but not too worried about it because I want a good quality electrical system, because it literally is a street strip car. I've never trailered this car to the track in the 38 years I've owned it, and it's never not gotten me home either. I've had a few close calls, but it's always gotten me home. So that's one thing I love about this car, is the fact that it is a true street strip car. So instead of running 1120 something, I just put the stereo in it and did all that. But regardless, this alternator is pretty neat. Now, basically, it's a 170 amp alternator. And, you know, it's a little bit more than, I think originally this alternator, the size of this thing was like 135 or something. And the company, this guy, pretty neat. The output of an alternator, basically its output ability is determined by the stator here and how many windings and how big it is. And it's a pretty large alternator, but modified it and got 170 max out of it, and it puts out like 165. I basically tested it, load tested it, and had an amp gauge on it. But one of the biggest things with an alternator, if you look at the back here, it's called the diode. The diode trio, it has 6 diodes in it. But generally these alternators, and this one has it. This has the same exact diode box in it inside. So what this guy did was he basically doubled up the diode. So it has 12 total. And the diode system in an alternator is the most stressed part in high output situations. And I had to learn this the hard way back in the day when I built that Mercury Comet. The battery was bad and I was determined to drive this car because I just wanted to go cruising in it. And I basically charged the battery up best I could and got it going. And by the time I got to work, which was probably 20-minute drive, this diode, it was inside the alternator. The diode, I'm gonna call it the diode trio, had completely melted from just putting out full amperage all the way to work, trying to charge a dead battery basically. And it destroyed the diode system. So had to learn that lesson the hard way, but then I did some research, and the way this guy sets this up is really neat because it basically doubles the diodes in the alternator, and so they have to do half the work. So that's pretty neat. We got that in there, 170 amp, high quality alternator, good belt system and all that. And the electrical system on this car runs perfect. I have no issues now. Just after doing all my homework and trial and error, you know, makes it all come together. But that's another really cool thing I did with this, and everything's good. Okay, another reason why I put this high power alternator in here wasn't just for the stereo system. If you look at this thing, I got 2 electric fans off this thing. There's no mechanical fan. And also I have a electric water pump. It's not driven by a belt. And that's literally worth 2-3 tenths on the racetrack. So that's a pretty cool tip. Anybody out there looking to get a little bit more ET on the racetrack, man, that thing was money. But you know, and it also has fuel injection. So all those electrical demands, plus the stereo, it definitely required me to upgrade the alternator system. And this thing's been working 10 years, no problem. Haven't had any issues out of it so far. And basically, I haven't even checked it when it's running with the stereo blasting, but probably runs around 100 amps or so, you know, with the stereo fully going. But the alternator is not overworking because it has the potential for 170. So it's not running the alternator at max when I got all this electrical stuff happening at the same time driving down the road, and it just keeps everything happy. So that's pretty cool. Another quick tip, anybody out there maybe not have thought about this, but some people know this, some people don't, but I learned the hard way with that Comet and melting the crap out of the diode system in the alternator. But if you think about it, any chance you get when you have a dead battery, you want to externally charge the battery with a charger instead of jump starting it and letting your alternator do all the work to fully charge this battery. Because with a totally dead battery, when you jump start the car, the alternator is basically putting out as much as it can to get the battery charged up to 12.6, and that alternator is just doing nothing but overworking the whole time. So anytime you have a dead battery, your best bet is to charge it with an external charger instead of letting your alternator do the work and taking thousands of miles off your alternator. So kind of learned that the hard way, but now I know better. And any chance I don't jump start a car, I'll charge it with a charger, and then the alternator just has to do the work of running the car instead of killing itself charging the battery also. Okay, that's gonna hopefully wrap it up for my condenser series here on this channel. I'm about done with condensers, and Rick Martin said he was gonna give me a whole box of condensers for Christmas. Pretty funny, but yeah, I was kind of glad to get this shameless plug in here for the Chevelle. I've been wanting to shoot a video on some of the stuff. I got a million things to share about this car, similar to that, like the electrical system, trial and error, and 38 years of learning doing this stuff. But yeah, the drivetrain, suspension, steering, everything on this car I want to show certain little tidbits that I've done and cool stuff that I've come up with. But basically all you got to do is stay overdriven, keep on getting it, keep learning every single day. It all works out. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Take care. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you real soon.